It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Daniel Royce, one of the youngest billionaires in the country, walked into a small diner just off the freeway. He wasn't there for a business meeting or a high-end lunch. He simply wanted a quiet place to think. With the weight of boardroom decisions and corporate deals clouding his mind, all he really wanted was a strong cup of coffee and a moment to breathe. But what happened next would change not only his day, but the course of his life. As he sat down, flipping through his phone, his attention was pulled away by a familiar voice. It wasn't the words she said, it was how she said them. That warm, calming tone, like a melody from the past. He looked up and saw a middle-aged waitress in a worn-out uniform balancing a tray of plates and moving from table to table with quiet grace. Something about her stirred a memory so deeply buried, it stopped him cold. It couldn't be, could it? Daniel's heart skipped. He watched her closely, her smile, the way she placed the dishes, even the small humming under her breath. And then, like a lightning strike, it hit him. This wasn't just any waitress. This was asterisk her asterisk, his childhood governess. The woman who raised him when his parents were too busy building their empire. The woman who had wiped his tears after nightmares, taught him to tie his shoes, and read him bedtime stories when no one else bothered. Her name was Margaret. He hadn't seen her in over 20 years. The last he remembered, she left without warning when he was just 9. No one ever explained why. He tried to ask back then, but the adults brushed it off. And now, here she was, serving pancakes in a roadside diner, like nothing ever happened. He wanted to jump up, call her name, ask her 1,000 questions. But he didn't. Not yet. A storm of thoughts rushed through his mind. Why was she here? What had happened to her? And why did she disappear all those years ago? As Margaret passed by his table, their eyes finally met. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. She blinked. He smiled, almost afraid to speak. But before he could say a word, she turned away, her expression unreadable. And in that instant, Daniel knew. This wasn't going to be a simple reunion. What he would discover next would unlock secrets he never imagined, and force him to make a choice that would change everything. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off her. Margaret. He whispered her name to himself like a secret only he remembered. She looked older, of course, with a few strands of gray in her hair and lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But it was her, the woman who had once been his safe place in a world full of cold walls and silent dinners. The more he watched her move around the diner, the more questions filled his head. How did someone who had once been part of their household, a woman who had meant so much to him, end up waiting tables in a place like this? He didn't want to scare her or make a scene. So he waited until she was done with her shift. He sat at that booth long after his coffee went cold, just watching and remembering. He recalled how she used to sneak cookies into his room when he had a bad day, how she never raised her voice, but somehow always got him to listen. She was the only one who really saw him, not as the future heir of the Royce Empire, but as a little boy who just wanted to be loved. When the diner began to quiet down, Margaret disappeared into the back, and Daniel finally stepped outside. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy. He stood near the back door, unsure of what he was even going to say. As he waited, memories kept coming, more vivid now. Her singing in the kitchen, the way she used to brush the hair from his forehead. How she cried quietly the night his parents left for a business trip without saying goodbye to him. And then the door creaked open. She stepped out, tying her jacket, clearly ready to head home. She didn't notice him at first. But when she did, her steps froze. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Her face went pale. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Margaret," he said softly. She didn't respond right away. Her eyes searched his face, and something in them shifted. Recognition, followed by something else. Fear? Pain. "I thought I'd never see you again," Daniel said. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She clutched her purse a little tighter. "You disappeared," he continued, "and no one would tell me why." She looked away, blinking quickly. "You shouldn't be here, Daniel." "Why not?" he asked. She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because the truth isn't what you think it is." And with that, she turned and started walking away, leaving Daniel standing in the dark, heart racing, the mystery only growing deeper. Daniel didn't follow her right away. He stood there, stunned by her words. Asterisk, the truth isn't what you think it is. Asterisk, that single sentence hit harder than any boardroom betrayal or stock market dip he'd ever faced. What truth? What had been hidden from him all these years? He drove back to his penthouse that night, but his mind stayed stuck in that dark alley behind the diner. Sleep was impossible. Every memory of Margaret, every odd moment from his childhood, every hushed conversation between the adults in his life, it all started to feel like pieces of a puzzle he'd never known he was supposed to solve. The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He wasn't going to let her disappear again. He returned to the diner, hoping to catch her before her shift. This time, he brought an old photo he had dug out of a family album. It was worn and slightly faded, but it showed him as a little boy sitting on Margaret's lap, both of them smiling. A moment of real warmth in a cold, silver-framed life. But when he arrived, she wasn't there. One of the younger waitresses, a girl named Jessa, told him Margaret had called out for the day. "She never does that," Jessa said. "Something must have shaken her." Daniel thanked her and left his number, just in case Margaret returned. While waiting, Daniel started digging on his own. With his resources, it wasn't hard to find fragments of her past. But what he found didn't make sense. Margaret's employment records ended abruptly the same year she left their house. After that, it was like she'd vanished from the system for nearly 2 decades. No jobs, no tax records, no trace. It was as if she'd been hiding. Daniel began to suspect there was more than just a falling out or quiet dismissal. Why would someone erase themselves unless they had something, or someone, to protect? He also noticed something odd when he revisited the family estate. There were photos missing. Family portraits where Margaret had once appeared, now edited or removed entirely. When he asked the housekeeper, she grew visibly nervous. "Best not to stir up the past, Mr. Royce," she said quietly. "Some things are better left where they belong." But Daniel couldn't let it go. That little boy inside him, the one who cried when Margaret left, needed answers. And the billionaire he had become had the power to get them. What he didn't know yet was that the truth he was chasing could unravel not just his past, but his family's entire legacy. And someone out there seemed determined to make sure that truth stayed buried. It had been 3 days since Margaret disappeared again. No calls, no signs, and her name was taken off the diner's schedule. Daniel felt a tension inside him growing by the hour. He knew he was close to something, some truth his family had gone to great lengths to hide. But the silence from Margaret made him feel like he was chasing shadows. Then a break came from an unexpected place. Late one night, Daniel received a text from an unknown number. Asterisk, meet me at the park near Briarwood Hill. Midnight, come alone. Asterisk, no name. But he knew it had to be her. The drive to Briarwood brought back even more memories. That park had been one of the few places where he and Margaret would go when his parents were away, feeding ducks, picking wildflowers, or just lying on the grass, while she told stories that made him feel safe. He arrived early, heart pounding, the billionaire mask he wore every day stripped away by the boy still hiding underneath. The park was quiet, lit only by dim streetlights and the occasional flicker from a passing car. Then he saw her, sitting alone on the old wooden bench beneath the willow tree. She looked tired, almost fragile, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. As he approached, she didn't look up. "I thought you deserved the truth," she said, her voice soft. "But it's not an easy one." Daniel sat beside her. "I need to know. Whatever it is. I've spent my whole life wondering why you left." Margaret finally turned to face him. Her eyes glistened with something between guilt and grief. "I left because I had to. I was forced to." His chest tightened. "By who?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Your father." Daniel blinked. "My father? Why?" "There were things going on behind those mansion walls that I couldn't be a part of," she said. "Things that weren't safe for me to know. I found out something I shouldn't have, something that could have destroyed him." Daniel could barely breathe. "What did you find out?" She looked away again. "Not here. It's not safe. I don't know who's still watching." That word, asterisk watching asterisk, sent a chill through him. "Margaret, are you in danger?" She stood slowly. "We both might be now." Before Daniel could press further, headlights flashed across the park from a car that had silently pulled up nearby. Margaret's eyes widened. "They found me," she said under her breath. Daniel turned, ready to confront whoever it was, but Margaret grabbed his arm. "No, you don't understand. If you go to them, they'll bury this again." The car door opened. A shadowy figure stepped out. And in that moment, Daniel realized this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about survival. Daniel instinctively stepped in front of Margaret as the shadowed figure approached, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. The stranger paused just beyond the glow of the park lights. He wore a dark coat, his face hidden by a cap pulled low. But there was something strangely familiar about him. Daniel's mind raced. Was this someone from his father's past? A hired man sent to keep secrets buried? But then the man spoke, his voice low and steady. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." Margaret exhaled sharply, the tension in her shoulders shifting slightly. "Eli." Daniel looked at her, confused. "Who is he?" She hesitated, then said something that turned Daniel's world upside down. "He's your brother." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Daniel shook his head. "That's not possible. I'm an only child." Margaret looked at him, her eyes full of pain. "That's what they wanted you to believe." Eli stepped forward, the dim light now revealing more of his face. And suddenly, Daniel saw it, the resemblance. The eyes, the jawline, even the slight curve of his nose. It was like looking at a version of himself he'd never known existed. "I was never supposed to know about you either," Eli said. "I was raised by someone else, far away from all of this. But when I started digging into who I really was, I found Margaret." Daniel felt dizzy. Everything he thought he knew about his family, his childhood, his identity, it was cracking apart piece by piece. "Why would they hide something like this?" he asked. Margaret looked away. "Because your father had everything to lose. An affair, a child born out of it, it would have destroyed his reputation, shaken the company's image. So they covered it up, paid people off, sent Eli and his mother away. And when I found out, they forced me out too." Daniel stared at the ground, struggling to take it all in. His father, the man who had shaped so much of his life, had lied about something this huge. But why now? Daniel finally asked. "Why come back now?" Eli glanced around the park. "Because I found something. Documents. Proof. Not just of the cover-up, but of things your father did to keep it all quiet. things that go beyond hiding a child. Crimes. Margaret stepped closer. This is bigger than any of us realized, Daniel. If the truth comes out, it won't just tear your family apart. It could bring down the entire Royce empire. And just then, from the shadows, another camera flash lit up the park. Someone was watching. Again. The secrets were no longer just buried in the past. They were chasing them in the present. Daniel turned sharply toward the flash, heart pounding. He scanned the trees but saw nothing. Whoever had taken that photo had already vanished. Margaret grabbed his arm, her voice urgent. "We need to leave. Now." They piled into Daniel's car and sped off into the night, heading toward a quiet, gated property Margaret had used as a safe house years ago. It was a small cabin hidden in the woods, a place where secrets could breathe without being overheard. Inside, Eli pulled out a flash drive from his jacket. "Everything's on here," he said. Financial records, payments to silence witnesses, offshore accounts, even evidence of blackmail. Your father went to great lengths to keep his public image spotless. Daniel stared at the drive in silence. His entire life, the company, the wealth, the Royce name was built on this foundation. Lies, cover-ups, betrayals. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked up. "We release it." Margaret's eyes widened. "Daniel, if you do this, you'll lose everything." "No," he said quietly. "I'll lose what wasn't mine to begin with." The next morning, the story broke. Headlines flooded every major news outlet. Asterisk Royce Empire under fire. Hidden hair, corporate cover-ups, and a legacy of deceit. Asterisk the media frenzy exploded. Daniel stepped down as CEO within hours and handed the reins to a trusted partner. He made a public statement, acknowledging the truth and promising to rebuild the family legacy with honesty and accountability. But just when it seemed like the storm had passed, the real twist came. 2 weeks later, Daniel received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single photo, an old picture of his mother, smiling, standing next to a young boy who wasn't Daniel. The handwriting on the back read, Asterisk, not everything your father kept from you was about business. Asterisk. Stunned, Daniel tracked the letter's origin. It led to a private investigator who had been hired years ago by his mother. She'd known about Eli, about Margaret, about the cover-up, but she hadn't stopped it. In fact, she had helped orchestrate it. Daniel confronted her in private, away from the cameras and reporters. She didn't deny it. "I did it to protect you," she said, "and to protect everything we built." The betrayal cut deeper than anything else. Not just his father, but his mother too. The very people who were supposed to love him most had been protecting a lie. And yet, in the wreckage, something new was beginning. Daniel and Eli, once strangers, now stood together, brothers not by choice, but by truth. The empire might have fallen, but from its ruins, something real had finally been born. The dust didn't settle overnight, but it did settle. In the weeks that followed the public fallout, Daniel Royce disappeared from the headlines. He stepped away from the spotlight, away from boardrooms and press conferences, and into something unfamiliar, an ordinary life. No security detail, no chauffeured cars, just him trying to figure out who he was now that the Royce name no longer carried the same weight. He stayed in touch with Eli. At first, their relationship was awkward, two grown men trying to find brotherhood after years of silence. But there was a shared understanding between them, one that needed no words. They met for coffee, talked about life, and sometimes sat in silence that said more than any conversation could. Eli had been denied a family his whole life. Now, for the first time, he had one. Margaret found peace, too. With the truth finally out, she no longer had to hide. Daniel helped her move into a small cottage near the coast, close to the water she'd always loved. He visited her often, sometimes just to talk, sometimes just to listen. She remained the steady voice in his life, the same as she had been when he was a boy. Only now there were no secrets between them. The Royce Empire, once a symbol of power and prestige, began to rebuild under new leadership. The company rebranded, launching transparency initiatives and programs that focused on corporate accountability. Daniel didn't return to run it, but he stayed connected, offering advice quietly, from the sidelines. And the world moved on, as it always does. Headlines faded. New stories took their place. But for Daniel, the real story wasn't about money or scandal. It was about rediscovery. About facing the truth, no matter how painful, and choosing integrity over legacy. He had once believed that success was measured in billions. Now he understood that the true measure of a man was what he chose to do when the masks came off and the lights dimmed. He kept the photo that started it all, the one of him and Margaret, back when life was simple and full of hope. It sat on his bookshelf, a quiet reminder of where he came from and how far he'd come. Sometimes the people we lose are never really gone. And sometimes the family we find isn't the one we were born into. It's the one we fight for, forgive with, and build from the ground up. And as the Waites crashed outside Margaret's cottage, Daniel smiled softly, finally at peace. Not because he had everything, but because he had what mattered.